Up from the Dust, Chapter 2 by Lon Clayton. The next morning I got up and went outside and peed in the corner of the chimney, which was the custom of the time. I began to take stock of the things around me. The old cow was a low one to be milked, and the stock wanted food and water, but the crowd was too beat from the trip that they was a slow about getting to stirring. Our grandpa was staying with us at the time, and I could hear him up and about. He lived in a room off the kitchen, and the kitchen was a ways from the house. That was the way they built them a few years before. Well, sir, my eyes were just about stuck all together with the pink eye. Some say that it was a vitamin shortage. Some say that it was a virus. Whatever it was, my eyes were stuck shut. All the old folks ever did was just tell you to pick off the scabs and maybe they would be better tomorrow. This morning, Grandpa hollers to me to come there to him. I went to him and he looked at my eyes. Now that's one heck of a mess, he says. He went back into his room and got a blue bottle with an eye cup on the end of it. Pa come out of the house about that time and let a couple of keen farts and scratches under his arms. Pappy says to my grandpa, that stuff you got in that bottle will put the boy's eyes out. Nah, it won't, says Grandpa. Come here, boy. And he puts my eye in the cup, and he told me to waller my eye around in the water, and so I did. It began to feel better at once. Pa was off to the barn to feed the stock, so I didn't hear any more from him. I don't think Grandpa gives a dang what Pa said anyway. I learned later that the stuff in the bottle was made of rainwater run through the ashes of an ash tree. Whatever it was, it made my eyes feel better. I went into our kitchen and looked around. There was an old muzzle-loader rifle hanging over the fireplace with a pewter mold to make the bullets and a powder horn. My pa never used it. It was left by the former owners, and an old coffee grinder hung there too. I always remembered these things the most, and a lamp with the red bottom, which my pa put gas in one time and had to throw it out the door when it caught a fire. Anyways, Ma got up pretty soon and went and milked the old Sicky saws. She stomped and hollered. She came back to the kitchen and commenced to start breakfast. She didn't use the old fireplace. She had a wood stove she used. Ma told me to get some wood from the pile and bring it to her, so I did, her biding. Ma commenced to beat the stovepipe and muttered to herself. I knew that meant something was out of order in the kitchen. Pa used to say that when Rose got her dress caught up in the crack of her bum, and she went beating on the stovepipe, there was hell to pay in the kitchen. She called me in and says, I'm out of flour and I want you to go and wake up your sister and take this bucket and go over to Betty's and borrow a bucketful from her till Tom can get it to the store or get some ground or whatever. Anyways, you and your sister get on over and back for I can get breakfast till you get back here, for I can't get breakfast. I went in and woke up Sue. She was the one just ahead of me, and we got along pretty good together most times. Well, sir, we lit out for Sam and Betty's in a hump. It wasn't too far, and we come up on it in a hurry. Betty was sitting in the rocking chair, dipping snuff and chomping on a black gum sprout. Our ma says, if you would be so kind, would you let us have a large bucket of flour, and we'll pay you back in a couple of days. She didn't say yay or nay, just ups and goes in the kitchen. There was a young shoat or hog in the kitchen, a-rooting around under the kitchen table, making a noise like scrub, scrub, or something to that effect. Betty lifted up the flour barrel a little, and a cat came out of there like a bat out of hell. The flour was a-going in all directions like a white cloud. Betty throwed the barrel lid at the cat, and he went for the door. In the meantime, the hog had gotten excited. He straightened up and was too high for the table. When that extra weight hit him, he spun around in around hollering, whoop, 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 whoop. The dishes flew in all directions. Finally, he made for the door. He went out the door and he left the table in the kitchen. Just as he cleared the door, one of their boys, Archie, vaulted on his back and rode him off like a bucking jackass. Betty sat back down and said, just as unconcerned as you please, somebody ought to kill that old hog. She scooped up a little more snuff then and got up and took our bucket. We had been trying to get out of the way all that time, and we thought she had forgotten all about us. She dipped us up some of the flour, and we started for home. Remember me to your ma and pa, she says, as we were leaving. When we got back home, we found Ma in the kitchen beating on the stovepipe and mumbling to herself. We told her all what happened to us and the flour in the bucket. I should have known when it rains it pours. I bet you pretty penny that flour has cat poop in it, and me out with your pa wanting his hot biscuits. I'll swear to you, when the devil takes a holt of you, he ain't gonna turn loose in a hurry. Don't tell your pa or your grandpa about this run-in with the cat. All right, Ma, we lowed. She took the flour back in the kitchen and commenced to knock and frailing and frying and scalding and whatever. Always, Pa said when he ate the biscuits at breakfast that the bread was sure good. Ma looked at us but didn't make a comment. After a while she said, Tom, this is the last of the flour, and she wished he would do something about it. He said he would later on that day. I got some bread and fed the blue-bellied lizards in the pine trees down by the barn. Ma said that they was rank poison, and Pa said that they wouldn't eat bread, but they did. And I had a ball watching them tear an ass up and down the trees. I got real friendly with them. This day, my pa and Sweetening was up cutting cedar posts on the Hyco and snaking them up to the loading place with old Bob, which was a little red mule that we had at the time. Bob was a fine little animal and as smart as he could be. Sweetening saw me up at the barn and called me to come down to him. Come here, boy, he hollered. I want you to do something for me. I went on down to him and waited for him to tell me what to do. Sweetening was always trying to figure out an easy way to do something, which was the way to go according to me, but him and Pa always was a-getting into it on that account. However, they got along pretty good for a father and son. Anyway, Sweetening says to me, when this mule gets up to the pile of logs, you unhook him and turn him around and tell him to get up, and he will come back to where Pa and I are, and I won't have to walk back up and down with him. You see what I mean? He asked. Yes, I can do that, I said, and I felt proud that I was being good for something. After they left, I sat on the logs and waited. The reason they were cutting logs in the first place was we were in a hard place and victuals were hard to come by. Pa, Sweetening, and Wright were the main workers in the family. Of course, my sisters worked right along with the men. They were in the field chopping cotton and hoeing tobacco or whatever. Pretty soon, old Bob come up the hill. I stood in the place that Sweetening had pointed, and when Bob came on it, I said, whoa, boy, and old Bob came to a halt and commenced to switch at the flies on him. I undone the hook like I had been told and went up and petted old Bob. He was just a fine animal and would let anyone pet him. He even held his head down for us littler ones. Well, sir, I turned him around and started him back down the hill, and he went off with no problems at all. I did that until they had gotten enough post for a load, and then they came up to the barn. Pa says, Wright and Albert, go down to the barn and hook up Annie and Charlie to the two-horse trailer and bring the wagon back here. We'll load these poles up. I got to take them to the Prospect Hill and try to sell them and get some flour and coffee and sugar and whatever. They went off to do as they were bidded. Lon, I'm going to take the hames off old Bob, and you take him to the pasture and turn him loose. Make sure you shut the gate good. I did as I was bid and took him to the pasture, and he lay down in the dirt and rolled over a couple of times. My pa said that if you could tell how much a mule was worth by watching him turn over, $50 for every time he went over, old Bob could turn over $200 worth every time. Yes, sir, he was a good animal, all right. I went back to where they were loading up the big wagon. They had it loaded up pretty high, and the team was hitched and ready to go. I would have liked to go, but I knew that was no use to ask because Pa didn't want no kids along. That didn't keep me from wanting to go, though. Grandpa was a-cussing his horse, Fanny, and getting ready to go off somewhere, and his dog, Nix, that always went with him wherever he went, was there. Pa pulled out of the yard with his load of cedar posts and headed for Prospect Hill to sell them for food or whatever they needed at that time. At that time, I didn't know a lot about finances, so I just looked on. After Pa left, I stood around and watched Grandpa hooking up the buggy and fixing his harness. Grandpa didn't care much for kids, so I stayed out of the way. His dog and I were very good friends and hunted snakes and rabbits, rats, or whatever. I petted him a little while Grandpa was getting ready to depart. Pretty soon he was all ready, and I'll never forget how he looked when he got up in that buggy. He would fix his lines just right, and then he would get his lap robe and spread it over his legs, arrange everything just the way he wanted it before he started out. The lap robe had an English lion on it and a red and a black background. His buggy had yellow wheels and a black body. He was all prized up in his black coat and striped breeches with a shoestring tie tied in a bow. With a shoestring tie tied in a bow. With a white shirt that wasn't white and a celluloid collar buttoned around his neck. Ma said that he was going to Miss Cat, Sally Ball's, which was a lady that lived down the road a piece. My grandpa was widowed. My grandma had died a ways back and I never did see her. She was named Katie. Anyways, I ran along sides of the buggy and was down the road and then turned around and started back to the house. Old Nix came and bid me goodbye and trotted off behind Gramps' buggy. Grandpa's hoss was a tossing her head like she always did, and they went on down the road. And that is the end of chapter 2. I hope you're enjoying these, and I am. I haven't read this book in quite a while, and it brings back, a lot of memories of what my dad used to tell us. Not that I know any of the people in the story, but it sure does bring back memories. I hope you guys enjoy hearing me read this story. Bye for now.